Welcome everybody. I'm Zoe. I'm the PEP Network coordinator for the NCCPE. Welcome to today's event. So we've got an Engage Fellows showcase for you today. Unfortunately, it's not going to go quite as planned. One of our Engage Fellows, Sarah Rafferty, is poorly today, so they won't be joining us, but we will hopefully record her presentation and share it afterwards alongside the recording of today. We're also waiting for Tanvir to join. Tanvir's had some technical difficulties. So yeah, definitely not going to go to plan, but I'm sure we'll have a really interesting event. We're going to go through the timetable in just a sec. We'll just get those slides up. Just some updates from the NCCPE. So we have our PEP Network survey out at the moment. If you've not already filled it in, it would be great if you could. The PEP Network survey is a way of telling us what's going on for you and your organisation, how you want the PEP Network to work, what sorts of events, activities and different things you'd like to see from us. We'll pop some links in the chat for the PEP Network survey. If you don't want to fill in the survey, we're also running some focus groups, which you can sign up to as well. Or you can always just drop us an email, whatever works for you. So today's little agenda, we've got a little welcome. We're going to hear from Sian, who is a project manager for the NCCPE and works on the Engage Fellows project. She's going to tell us a little bit about the programme. Then we're going to hear from Lewis. Lewis is one of our fellows and is looking at systems change. And then hopefully Tanvir's technical problems will have magically resolved. We'll hear from Tanvir. There'll be some time for Q&A from both of those fellows. We'll have a little bit of a break. And then we have some discussions and you'll be able to join a discussion group with one of the fellows, or you'll be able to discuss ideas for future fellowships. Then we'll have some feedback and we'll do a little wrap up. I can already see lots of you have started to introduce yourselves in the chat. We've got lots of different people here. We've got Lorraine from Durham, Adam from Milton Keynes, lots and lots of different people. Please do introduce yourself in the chat. You could say why you've come today. Whatever is on your mind. What's the weather like? That's always a good one, isn't it? But yeah, we're going to hand over to Sian, who's going to tell us a little bit about the Engage Fellows process and the project. So Sian, over to you.
Hi, good to go. Can you hear me okay? Just to check.
Yes, we can hear you.
You can. Hello everyone. It's good to be here. Good to be back with the PEP Network. So the Engage Fellowships, we have had a year of Engage Fellowships and we funded 3 fellows last year. So around June last year, we selected 3 fellows. We were going to select 2, but we were inundated with some really exciting applications and some of you might have applied and we're definitely interested in hearing your ideas again. So yes, we'll be excited to have those conversations later on in this session about what kind of fellowship applications you might put in. So just to give you a bit of an overview of the fellowships, they're awards of up to 25k, that's including VAT. And there might be some reasonable adjustment funding that we can add on top of that if need be. And they're about seeing quality engagement in higher education. You can apply as an individual, as a partnership or as a group. We funded 2 individuals and 1 partnership in the first round. And they're really for ideas that will strengthen engagement within the higher education sector. So they're not engagement grants, they're not for engagement projects, but you might want to really interrogate some engagement practice with a view to informing the sector. Or there might be a challenge that you think the sector is facing and needs to address or needs to be understood a bit better. And that could be a local challenge, but with generalizable learning and lessons that you might want to share. And you might want to explore change itself and this question of culture change. And we talk about PEPs as change makers a lot of the time because we want to understand and make visible that work that you do within your own institutions and trying to influence your peers and embed engagement and inclusive practice in your institutions, which isn't always the easiest role. And we want to recognise that you do that role and we want to recognise that there are questions around it and how does change happen, which I'm sure Lewis has a few answers to. So how is it going to look next year? Pretty similar. We're going to have another round. It's going to be of the same magnitude. We're envisaging launching it in autumn time or towards the end of the year. but it will all be advertised on our website and through the PEP network. It is only available to members of the PEP network. And this is, one of NCCPE's offers solely for PEPs. And another aspect of the fellowships is your professional development and your personal development, and that is key. So your idea is one part of what you might do, but then there's also how you hope to develop and what you hope to develop within your skill set and knowledge base. And so we offer mentorship, and perhaps the fellows that are with us today might comment a little bit on their mentorship relationship and how to make the best of that, and what you've taken from that. And we as an organisation offer you a bit of administrative support and a little bit of support connecting you up within our networks and with our thinking. Obviously, Sophie and Paul, very knowledgeable individuals, and we try and draw wisdom from them wherever we can. So yeah, and I'm excited. We're going to have a breakout group. One of the breakout groups will be a space in which we can explore ideas that you might have. So I'm excited about learning what those might be. Back to you, Zoe.
Thank you, Sian. So it's great to see that Tanvir has joined us now as well. So we're going to hear from Lewis first of all. Lewis will talk for about 10-15 minutes. There'll be time to ask Lewis some questions. Then we'll hear from Tanvir. Same. Tanvir will talk for 10 to 15 minutes. Then we'll have some questions for Tanvir. So while Tanvir and Lewis are talking, please do think about questions, pop them in the chat. And then we'll bring them both together for some questions together. Once again, unfortunately, Sarah's poorly today, so hasn't been able to join us, but we'll record her presentation separately and we'll make sure we share them all together so you can catch up on that one. Sarah's also helping run the Service Learning, Community Engaged Learning Conference in York in a couple of weeks. We'll pop a link for that in the chat in case anyone is interested in that event. But now we're going to hand over to Lewis. So Lewis, are you going to share your own slides or do you want us to share them? I know you were going to double check that.
I'm thinking
Yep, you're going to share them yourself. Lovely.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, great to be here, and I've set my timer, so hopefully I can. So no one knows I can speak for Scotland, so I will keep it to 15. But yeah, really great to be here. It's a shame Sarah couldn't join us, but yeah, really excited for the conversation. My name is Lewis Hou. I run an organisation called Science Kaylee. I'll mention a bit more about context of maybe how I got to some of the kind of current wider work that we're doing, particularly around systems change, around knowledge democracy type work, particularly in the Highlands and Islands and Scotland in general, and then how that leads into some of the kind of plans for the fellowship, which has evolved and changed quite a lot, even from the very proposal stage, which was probably around this time last year. So the best laid plans of mice and men, as they say, but loads of learning in there. So I'll spend hopefully the most time focusing on some of those reflections, which is hopefully useful just from obviously those within the public engagement space and working between communities and research, but also even for those thinking about doing a fellowship yourselves and what's been most helpful so far. Plenty more to do. So very briefly, just to set context, I run Science Kaylee, we're a social enterprise.
Has Lewis frozen for everybody? Oh. Lewis, you froze for a second. If you want to rewind and press play again.
Interesting. Where did I stop?
Science Kaylee.
Science Kaylee. Okay, we're a social enterprise I set up back in 2016, and very much being an intermediary organization. So a lot of our work is looking, we support interdisciplinary learning, we take the Gaelic meaning of Kaylee as well as, which is bringing people together, as well as, of course, a kind of transdisciplinary approach to traditional music arts as a way of convening and bringing different knowledges together. We have a very strong piece of work in youth work in particular, and that's been a bit of our bread and butter, but we also work very strongly within the cultural sector in Scotland and beyond as well. And our vision, I suppose, is this idea of cultural and knowledge democracy. So how we define that is, rather than just thinking about how we make culture, creativity, knowledge more accessible, it's questioning whose knowledge and creativity and culture is valued in the first place, and how we support more diverse production. As well as working in the community space as practitioners, we have more recently been focusing quite heavily on looking at how we can develop funding models and slightly more kind of network or systems-based models, thinking about how we can fund and support community-led research in the Highlands and Islands in particular. And so I'm not going to talk too much in depth about this, but I think it's just important in the sense of how I came to the fellowship idea and thinking more about systems. There's 3 programs that we support, with the first 2 are the British Science Association. And so one of the models is, and so the idea around these are how we can maybe think about public engagement or research funding that goes directly to communities. So they are leading, they are the PIs, as it were, particularly working with communities who are very much marginalized and underrepresented within the research and innovation system, within climate change, within mental health. Many of the communities that we fund and developed relationships with and encourage to fund have never had funding before, are very grassroots. Some of them don't have bank accounts. Many of them have never worked with researchers before. And so really thinking about what's that kind of, it's more than just the money, but what's the process that's needed to happen, the trust that's needed to be built from across our kind of cultural networks, our community development networks, and then of course the research networks, to really encourage people to think about developing a project and process and build capacity around funding community-led research. So I'm not going to talk too much about these programs specifically, but just to give you a little flavor, the Highlands and Islands Climate Change Community Research Grants is funded by UKRI with the BSA, and that was obviously looking at these kind of more relational grants that was connecting communities, many of them coastal communities, rural communities in the Highlands and Islands, to lead climate change projects. And they were around £5,000 to £7,000 in terms of kind of investment and capacity building. The Ideas Fund was funded by Wellcome, and it is funded by Wellcome. And these are bigger grants looking at mental well-being in general. And there's about 22 of these projects across the Highlands and Islands that we've been supporting. And these have been everywhere between £25,000 to £300,000, £400,000 at the moment. And these have moved very much thinking about the infrastructure. Obviously, this way of working is not necessarily the standard way of working. And so really recognizing how the research system really struggles when communities are leading in a very kind of specific way. And I've talked a few times about some of the learning about this process. I think what's really interesting is it obviously opens up a very different type of power dynamic within, and it opens different challenges in terms of the kind of the pressure it can put on communities. That funding can obviously address some of those things, but actually funding doesn't always address everything. It doesn't address some of the place-based challenges or the kind of capacity challenges that communities have. You know, to give an example, even if you have funding for a project officer, if there's no accommodation locally, and then finally, Curiosity in Action, which is looking at youth work and STEM. This is funded by SDFC, a bit more action orientated, but looking at how youth work STEM could be a tool for youth work to support social outcomes as well. So I think 3 years ago, our kind of focus was really supporting these programs and projects and community partners, really kind of thinking about the kind of the learning that's coming through this kind of experimental approach of the kind of redistribution of funding and what can happen, what's the benefits and what's the, you know, very immediate impacts that communities can have, the capacity building, but also what the challenges are, as I mentioned before. And that's on both sides, really, both for the communities in terms of not having necessarily the infrastructure. If they're leading the data, the kind of research, do they have the right support to hold the data securely? There are ethics processes that assume that the researcher is leading this process. And so when the communities are PIs, then that completely changes the dynamic. And again, it's a bit of a kind of uncharted territory. And that's not to say that this work hasn't worked ethically, but actually, how do we kind of think about this and building that learning to build ethics processes that can center communities in the first place? So we got a separate grant from Wellcome, and we're currently through this work at the moment, which is looking at some of this kind of infrastructure. What can we invest in the Highlands and Islands, in rural Scotland, and in Scotland in general, to really kind of make some of these kind of changes around the system. So even if I change everyone's minds to say that this is the right way, or this is a valuable way to work, obviously not the only way that we can work, the system still makes this very, very difficult. And so this leads us to our Community Knowledge Matters network, which is we are running. It's our kind of advocacy network. It's an open network, and so people on the call might be interested in joining and keeping in touch with us. But we've invested in a few different kind of working projects and experiments to kind of change the systems in different ways. So one example is looking at a rural survey, which is supporting communities, rural communities, to set the agenda around how they want to engage in mental health research. And again, one of our interesting elements of that is working with policymakers and people who are in more kind of decision-making capacities to think about, well, community-led research very often looks very different from more traditional research. How do we change what is valued as evidence so it can actually make the difference that communities are wanting it to make? And obviously we've seen how community-led research can become better quality research. It opens different questions and different knowledges and values different knowledges. We're also trialing a new ethics process, which is centering communities. It's taking a human rights-based approach. And so the idea around this is that communities are much more able to set the terms of how they want to be involved in research, rather than waiting for an ethics process led by a university that doesn't necessarily center the lived experiences that the communities themselves have. So there's a lot around this work, but this is really one of the kind of seeds of how we began to start thinking about the Engage Fellowship in particular. So this last year was kind of the key question we were exploring. So how can the system be reimagined and changed to enable more of these equitable power dynamics, inclusive knowledge production with communities who have been historically marginalized? And it's changed a lot in terms of what we initially planned. But I think at the moment, we're still very much in the kind of first phase, where it's been kind of embedding with the current work that's been going on. There's lots of things that are happening in the sector right now, of course, with the NCCPE, with the Engaging Futures process. There's a lot of work with UKRI looking at, Young Foundation, for example, looking at the kind of community research networks, and obviously the work that we're doing with the Ideas Fund. And so how do we embed all these things and add this connectivity across the work? My phase two is, so one, I've been quite self-critical about this. We don't always need new podcasts, but I am interested in podcast models as a way of kind of maybe mainstreaming a conversation around system change. I think one thing that's been really, I really feel, is that there's so many good pockets of practice. But I think one of the reasons why it feels like we've had this conversation so many times is that, you know, the system doesn't change through projects, and that is a real challenge. Projects are important because they give us good ideas of practice and case studies, and they give us hope that change is possible. But we also need to kind of galvanize and think about that genuine system change, which is, and I feel like the time is now when universities are really, you know, everything has to be reimagined, because this current system is really creaking and breaking. And so I kind of want to focus on exploring a little bit around some of these kind of wider themes. So obviously we're working very much in Scotland, taking a bit more of an international approach and thinking about, well, what does system change actually look like? And what are the kind of international examples of this across different sectors, where things are actually happening, that big changes are happening, and actually what does that, how can we then reflect that back into the higher education sector? One thing I'm quite keen on is also thinking about things that often feel really big and out of scope, as it were, so things like, well, our fundamental economic system, and you know, that includes obviously how universities are funded, or higher education institutions and research is funded in the first place, and the models around that, reliance on studentships and you know, income generated from accommodations and all these types of things. Even thinking about some of these kind of wider elements, because they have a massive impact on how we actually implement community-led research, and how that's valued and how that's paid for, how that's really genuinely valued or not. I'm really interested in international development spaces, where there's been a lot of critique of more colonial models of knowledge making. And I think that's important in terms of diversifying and decentralizing some of these kind of the power of knowledge production in an international space. I think funding policy, of course, we're really interested in, but I think I'm really interested in thinking about it from this perspective of not just what's the rhetoric around co-production, for example, and what are the actual mechanisms and the practice, which are the stifling things that I'm sure everyone on the call will recognize, short time schedules, no time for relationship building, having to set your outcomes way before the actual project develops and evolves. And things like that on a both kind of research sector, but also looking at the arts and culture sector, for example, for interesting examples, looking at government level funding, and also thinking about some of the challenges around that and how it's very often focused on this kind of it's not preventative spends that we think when we think about policy in general, and how do we flip that. And then finally, really interested in more democratic processes in terms of things like citizen assemblies, thinking about different models where, again, think about the impact of what can community-led research feed into that actually will help our democratic processes in different parts of the world. So it's very open, very broad, it's massively ambitious. And so, but obviously really at the moment we're looking for a podcast producer to help think about narrowing down some kind of really interesting stories that are kind of broadly interesting. And I'm very interested in making sure the podcast itself, I've got a kind of working title, it doesn't always have to look like this, is quite, isn't just for academics or isn't people within higher education, but actually, using the story of how we could change systems, different examples, and reflect that back into higher education just as a starting point for conversation with people. And then the final phase, which will be probably at this point, end of this year, is really thinking about once these podcasts are ready and developed, sparking wider conversations and think about what next. So I'm going to quickly talk about these reflections. As usual, I've gone a tiny bit over my 10 minutes for now. Learning reflections. So everything that takes more time. I don't think that's going to be surprising. I'm sure Tanvir and Sarah will probably agree with me on this one. But I suppose to give a bit more detail about this, I think there's always that something about balancing grace. Very often we talk about how we work and model an ethics of care in this. So both personally and within a team and within the structures, people are off, life happens. And so even within co-production and partnerships and, this is always the challenge of like, how do we have grace around this and patience whilst also keeping some momentum and the role of structured support. And I've really valued the support from NCCPE and kind of to help think about some of these kind of those support models. And there's some accountability around that as well to kind of keep things moving along. And that's, especially the case even when you're doing something very personal, when it's very difficult to justify, when you're firefighting other things and staff are off, to justify time to reflect and do something that is just for your own development. And that's been one of the most important things about the fellowship, is having that kind of, it's a way of justifying that time, even though it shouldn't need to be justified. I think the kind of broader learning which is really resounding, is, we've talked a lot about infrastructure and the importance of infrastructure and investing in that for system change. But I feel like one of the most important bits of infrastructure is really just to have that time, which is so easily stripped away, to make good on kind of values, the values that you want to emulate, to model, to live, to have the time to do that, to nurture relationships. And that's obviously with other people. There's always connections to make and sharing, and how you have time for that, and for yourself as well, to really understand yourself and to build solidarity. I was really taken by this idea of infrastructure around solidarity and values and time, more, as much as it is about physical, kind of technical or digital infrastructure. Unsurprisingly, I think everything has been much more tangled and embedded, at least up to this point. So, it's been very messy, but in a good way, of using the fellowship time to really kind of bed in with the things that we're already doing, what's happening, and what some of the work we're doing in the arts and culture sector, working with different funders and doing community building. Obviously, just even running Science Kaylee as a social enterprise and thinking about, how do we make it sustainable? How do we model the kind of ethics of care that we want to encourage others to take within this work? And that's, again, one of the reasons why these things can be very slow. And how do we make it sustainable in general? Who funds the intermediaries when network building and this kind of shared learning and the generosity is very often very intangible, but we know when it's not there. And then finally, of course, what's going on in the wider sector. What has been really helpful though is, recognizing that reflective practice is part of the work, and I reflect in lots of different ways, but and I very much encourage people to think about what works best for you. So in the last year and a half, more separately actually, but now I've really acknowledged it as part of the fellowship, is I've really just taken to journaling every day. That makes a massive difference for me to actually think about how we process and spend a bit of time thinking about the kind of both my own personal journey, but how things fit together, and process having the space for this and carving that out every morning. That's been a really useful habit. Scrapbooking, so I've got this massive Google document where I just throw random like links and conferences I've been to and learning all in one place, with the kind of proviso that at some point I will go through this and synthesize this, but maybe I won't. But I think this will be that kind of more kind of personal, throw everything in one Google Doc, and then just so it's all in one place, and so I can and then the next thing is to have some time to synthesize that. Blogs, I find writing really difficult. I think anyone in the NCCPE team or anyone who's worked with me for blogs know that I find that's my last vestige of perfectionism. I just can't let go of blogs, and I find them very difficult. But again, using this as a time to kind of push myself in that. But a concept I've came across recently, which I really love, is the idea of a digital garden, which I don't know if people have come across, but it's the idea of it's learning in the open. And so it's a little bit like the scrapbook I have, but actually it's a public scrapbook where you put things that are not polished at all out in the open, and different bits of sharing. And actually one of the things I'm really interested in is building a digital garden for the fellowship and for our wider work, as a way of kind of learning in the open transparently. And it might help me because I know it doesn't need to be polished at all. It's essentially an extension of some of the notes I've been taking when I come across really interesting practice. So I share that as an offer, and I'll share a link in terms of the philosophy of the digital garden. And then finally, personal project boards. So speaking to mentors, really, and my mentor as part of the fellowship has been Jude Fransman. You can see her, she came up to Edinburgh and we spent a couple of days together just embodying and being kind of in space together. And it's been so invaluable to be working with Jude, just on personal things as much as anything about work, and learning from each other's journeys and supporting that. Obviously working with the other fellows, we've had kind of monthly catch-ups, and that's always really helpful just to hear different perspectives, and obviously the support that NCCPE have been giving in lots of different ways, whether that's even just giving me access, UE access to be able to access journals, which I've not had for a wee while. So that space to sense make, be curious, and think about what next. And one of my background things is starting to work towards thinking about doing a PhD in this space as well. And so having the time, the mentorship, and the support to start thinking about what that might look like has been really invaluable. So I'm going to stop sharing, but just to say thank you to everyone to date. And obviously this is the start of the journey. The call out for the podcast collaborator has gone out, and we are looking for people to help in terms of the edits and production. And the blogs, the Substacks, the digital gardens, watch this space. And I'll leave it there. Thanks, Zoe.
Thanks, Lewis. Very, very interesting as always to hear about your work. We've got a couple of questions in chat, which we'll go through. So the first one was from Lorna. So Lorna would love to hear more about the process around paying community partners without an organizational bank account and engaging with those who hadn't previously been engaged in the past. Any tangible learnings? So there's probably two questions there. So maybe take the payment one first.
Sure. So yeah, we particularly with the Ideas Fund, because of the kind of size of the grants and the flexibility that we had, we could develop some interesting models of how we could do that with the Ideas Fund team with VSA. The primary one was using kind of platforms like Open Collective, which are basically kind of the more used in kind of activist spaces. But the idea is it's an open bank account. You can look at people's open collectives, people can donate to them, but any transaction is basically also public. And so these were some of the mechanisms. There were lots of technical challenges with Open Collective, if I'm honest, in terms of the kind of, it's not as straightforward in many ways, but it was one of the main workarounds that we could get a good balance between obviously being flexible and not requiring the bank account per se, a formal one, but then also being able to support people and in some cases then helping them. A lot of my time as development coordinator was in some cases helping people if they wanted to set up or constitute or have a more formal bank account, than having that ability. But yeah, Open Collective is probably the main kind of practical tip there. And then engaging with those who haven't previously engaged in the past. Yeah, obviously that's, I think, so for both grant schemes, for the Hands On Islands and Ideas Fund, our role was very much place-based, and we've worked in, well, more particularly the islands of Scotland, more than the kind of Highlands. But we had historical relationships that we've been nurturing for a long time. A lot of our work in the cultural sector and the kind of youth work sector have been in the Hands On Islands in particular. And so for us, it was kind of almost cross-referencing some of those, and having the time to talk to people on the phone and actually encourage them to say, hey, this is an opportunity that you might be interested in. I'm trying to reassure. And obviously there's that kind of pre-relationship building, all the relationships that we have to support people to get to a point where they feel like they can apply. And obviously very often our role was to even help them apply. I think one of the very difficult things was triaging, because then there are even community organizations that are very, grant writers, they know how to say the right things. And so a lot of my work was trying to kind of navigate that and kind of prioritize groups that we just couldn't fund in other ways. And I knew that this was a really good opportunity to fund them. And then, for example, in both cases, there was a community panel that I didn't sit on. So again, that was one of the ways that we addressed some of those kind of biases. But I was on hand to give that wider contextual information for the groups that we could support, who are, in the Highlands and Islands, working class, or racialized communities in the Highlands and Islands especially. And so it was a lot of targeted research, network building, relationships to get us to that point.
Thanks, Lewis. And the next question is from Adam. So Adam said, marginalised groups often return to the same groups for every sector: education, health, housing, employment, etc. These groups are willing to change, but often they are not able. If involved in research, how can we ensure they're able to change or get more involved in change after the research is done?
Marginalised groups often return to the same groups for every sector.
So I guess the question is, maybe they feel like they're not able to change. So then what's the legacy? So they get involved in one of your projects or pieces of research. What's the legacy after that might enable them to change things about their place or their context?
Yeah, no, definitely. Okay. I think for us, there's an element around how we involve the kind of decision makers and the kind of local policy and being proportional around that. So for the climate change grants, for example, we were always very active about bringing kind of local stakeholders into those kind of conversations. They were invited to the community practices that we held with the groups and the kind of celebration events. It was a small grant in the grand scheme of things, but actually even having some of those elements that we can make sure that we can signpost to. But what's been very useful is that even, for us, there are always limitations to project-based funding, but our role as development coordinators was to try and make as much investment within the groups as possible, so they always leave with more capacity than they end up with. And obviously things like CKM, Community Knowledge Matters, we run community practices, we run advocacy, we've got a gathering. That is one of our key kind of commitments, so that anyone who's been funded by us, that is something that they can, everyone's welcome to that. So that's a kind of a continuity to enable things, thinking about kind of policy change, or kind of enacting as I said before, it's great if we fund community-led research, but it's not an academic exercise. It's actually, most groups want to do research because they want to make a difference. And so we're thinking about how we build those kind of collaborations and solidarity to make the biggest change. And a lot of that is centered around how the advocacy we're doing as a network of Community Knowledge Matters. We respond to Scottish Government consultations and those types of things, and try and make sure there's that kind of that link, and that we're not just trying to change what communities are saying, but we're actually trying to make policymakers broaden what they count as evidence themselves.
Thank you, Lewis. It was great to hear from you. I'm sure we'll have time for more questions from Lewis before the break, but now we're going to hear from Tanvir. So we're going to bring Tanvir onto Spotlight, and we're going to share Tanvir's slides. Great. Tanvir, I'm so sorry that you had some technical difficulties today. It's always the way, isn't it?
Of course it is. And, and there's, my interest is in inclusion, and there I am with my tech excluding me, which is typical.
Cool, yeah.
But anyway, I just want to say thank you, Lewis, and thank you so much, everybody, for coming to this. I'm here. I'm also in the background. I do also have my wonderful support worker, Debbie, and she's going to be helping me with some of the slides. Just so you know, I'm registered blind. I have a little bit of sight, so I am able to read all the information that's on the slide. I will be reading, so if anyone else is visually impaired, do know that I'll be reading what information is going to be on each slide. And actually, I was just thinking, before we get into this, because I've kind of crashed in and with my tech all over the place, and everything is a bit all over the shop. I always start, I do creative writing sessions, and I always start with a very brief breathing exercise. So if anyone wants to have a quick stretch or just get up and move around, otherwise I'm just going to lead us in just 3 breathing breaths. And this is a really good one for anyone who is out there who occasionally gets quite anxious before a presentation or something like that. And the breath is you breathe twice in through your nose, and then you breathe once slowly out through the mouth. So I'll do one to show you. You go in and breathe out. And we're just going to do that 3 times. So we're going to breathe in and breathe out. Bit of a shake. Breathe in and breathe out. And the final one, breathe in, hold it, breathe out. And that hopefully will sort out your limbic system a little bit, certainly mine. Thank you for your patience. Right, so we can move on to the first slide. Brilliant. So my slides, I've titled them "A Place at the Table." My Engage Fellowship is really focused on something we're calling transformational inclusion. And by transformational inclusion, I mean we're talking about not us and them, but about us. And not about how can we help them, but how can we all help each other. So a lot of what you've already heard from Lewis will be within and part of what I'm trying to do or trying to explore with my particular fellowship. So next slide, just to tell you a little bit about myself. I've just done a slide which kind of lists my creative portfolio career, because I thought it's really important for us to kind of examine all the different parts of ourselves, what we all bring over our incredible bonkers lifetime, what we bring to this point in 2025. So for me personally, these are just some of the things that I've bounced around. So I was a checkout person in a shop, not in a funeral home. I've been an actor, and obviously as an actor, I was also a waitress. I was a bingo caller. Apparently I bingo called just like Princess Diana. I didn't know Princess Diana did bingo calling. I was a rubber stamp factory manager. I was a filmmaker. That was a crucial part of my career. I became a communications manager. I bounced into radio writing, did some pieces with, and still do with Radio 4. I became a photographer, developed sensory photography practices. I was very unemployed for periods of time. I became a citizens advice advisor. And at the same time as doing that, I became a disability activist. And then things began to change. I discovered that I could write, and I became a novelist, a lecturer in creative writing, and then a research fellow, and then more recently, a co-opted Corsham town councillor here in Corsham. I'm also slave to a cat called Habibi, and a very dear dog buddy for my guide dog, Mitzi. And all those things have led me to this Engage Fellowship and to the idea about where and why I wanted to explore transformational inclusion. As a research fellow over the last few years, I became involved in several projects which were exploring disability and community and how disabled people experience community. One was called the D4D project, and another one, a welcome-funded We Are the People project. I'm currently working on another project called Sensing Climate, which might be of interest to some people. It's looking at disability and climate precarity. So things like disability and social justice, emergency preparation, and I'm leading the creative writing interventions around exploring how we as disabled people feel about climate. And then the Engage Fellowship. And the Engage Fellowship is really the kind of culmination of all these different little bits and pieces of myself. So next slide, please. Okay, so this is the idea, this is how it started. I wanted to explore transformational inclusion because of my background and also because of becoming both a disabled activist and a local councillor, and recognizing there was these gaps of knowledge and of empathy and of understanding, and wanting to find a way to bridge those spaces. So I wanted to explore transformational inclusion through creative public engagement at the intersection of disability, higher education, and local government. And the key milestones were to create an international disabled-led public engagement network. That was part of what I had hoped would come from this. And a simple one-day symposium with 3 additional kind of online conversations. Now that was what I thought I was going to do. So next slide, please. Okay, so this is not, and as Lewis says, everything explodes. And like with anything, you know, all these ideas kind of came together, and then there was more and more and more and more, and every time you opened a door, there was another door to go through and another place to explore. So the ideas morphed, preconceptions were challenged, plans went sideways, confidence evaporated, it returned as bloody-mindedness, and things have now snowballed and are currently expanding into, and next slide, please, a Place at the Table symposium. So what's happened is, for this kind of wonderful kind of staged marathon of the Engage Fellowship over the year, things have culminated in bringing all these ideas together, not just into a one simple day symposium, but into a week of events in September. We're going to have a week of events, some online, and then we're going to have 2 days in-person events on the 3rd and the 4th of September. And the idea is to showcase good practice, exploring the why, the how, the what, and the when of equity and inclusion, especially given the very precarious global context at the moment. And the idea is this will lead over the week to a manifesto, a kind of a blueprint for a manifesto for inclusion in the Southwest that some of our institutions might sign up to, and that we can then revisit in a year's time, say, and find out what else is, how these things have developed. And I think as Lewis said, one of the main problems was scope. Having the time to really both embody what the kind of journey of exploration, and at the same time, as life kind of hits and things change, to also kind of ride ride the kind of the river down towards something that will happen within the year. And the year just didn't seem in the end to be enough. There was just so much that was possible. Sorry, so next slide, please. Okay, so very quickly through. So with the symposium, we've got some wonderful proposed presentations and speakers. I've listed them here. So things like we have speakers talking about creativity, community, integration and recovery, disability and social justice. We've got Wiltshire Council and their pioneer connection with Wiltshire Independent Living, which is a wonderful group of disabled young people. We have Helen Belcher, who's a Cabinet Minister for Economic Development, Regeneration and Assets, who's going to be talking about LGBTQ plus and social justice. Bath welcomes refugees. We're looking at creative writing interventions, so poetry and healing. We've got the Sarah Cowley leading Just Imagine If towards a manifestation for inclusion, and then potentially other groups including Frozen Light, creating inclusive theatre for people with profound learning difficulties. We've also got our lot, NCCPE, Bath University, and various other people coming together to really explore what inclusive futures might look like. Community First, another local charity looking at home care, reporting from the front line, and again, disability and climate precarity. So lots and lots of things. I think nearly last slide. Next slide, please. And again, we've got some really lovely, sorry, next, one slide back, thank you. Really great ideas for interactive events. So Great Snakes and Ladders benefit game we're going to be developing with a fantastic disabled artists and groups of activists. Again, questions and fears around disability more generally with Phoebe Kemp. The interactive Just Imagine If 3 Horizon exploration. We're going to be doing walkthroughs in the town, walking with people like myself with my guide dog, or other people in motorised wheelchairs. So people can, local councillors can be walking and talking to us as we walk through. We're going to be working with our local library, discussing books that they want burned with Caution Library, having an exhibition, discussion and readings. We're going to have graffiti walls, creative writing interventions, maybe even a community choir, and possibly some forum theatre. And I think that's then on to the last slide. Last slide. You are invited. And we've still got time. I know that we've got the big summer holiday coming up, but you would be so welcome, all of you, to come along as participants, or if you would like to present something. And I'd be really interested to know more about what kind of, what you would like from an event like this. We want to really make it, you know, especially the in-person event, to really make it feel as inclusive as possible. So we will have BSL, we will have quiet space, we will have space outside for people to walk around. We will have a structure in the program, but will also be flexibility for people to move in and out of the program. And of course, we will have tea and cake, lots and lots of cake. And I think that's everything from me. Yes, I think that's it.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Tanvir. It was great to hear all about it. We've not got any questions in the chat, but I've got a couple of questions for you. What are you most excited about for the symposium?
I am really, I want my biggest thing is to find a way to allow people to, by the end of the sessions, like the day at each session, but also at the end of each day, for people to feel like they've really changed something, or they've been able to move something or taken part in something that has created value for them, or that they know that they've got something that they can possibly take away that will create value for others as well. That's what's really exciting, is to kind of have something where people feel not exhausted at the end of the day, but actually like they're walking away with something, something to treasure. I think that's,
yeah, lovely. Yeah, that's something to take away, not feeling overwhelmed, but having something tangible that they feel they can change or enact. Yeah,
yes.
lovely.
Yeah.
And the flip side of that, what are you worried about, or what's keeping you awake at night?
I'm one of the issues that happened for me. I have a degenerative sight condition, and during this year, I've had quite complex health issues, and because this Engage Fellowship has given me the opportunity to bring my lived experience forward, and I really feel so grateful for that, to not feel that I have to shy away from my visual impairment, but actually I can lean into it. I can talk about it, and I can, when Lewis was talking about journaling and about, sort of reflecting, this is part of me, and the issues that I've had with this have affected the fellowship and have affected my confidence, and affected my energy and my ability. And one of the things, as somebody with a disability, we always have to try harder, work harder, be faster, to try and scramble to get, so it's not just the work, it's also the other things that go alongside that. And I am worried about not having, not being like, not having the kind of the bandwidth and the strength to do it. And yet I've got this amazing team, I've got all you guys. So, it's a worry that's there. And the Engage Fellowship is actually part of it, is helping me to reflect on that and to utilize that, to make it, again, this thing of creating value, make it something that can be useful for other people to learn from as well. How do I express the anxiety around the losing vision, and at critical times when you're trying to work, in a way that might help and support other people moving forward.
Thank you, Tanvir. Very humbling. And we've got a couple of comments in the chat as well. So one from Gemma. I love the idea that we look at inclusion together rather than how do we include that group of people. Gemma has a neurodiverse teen and thinks that if school could be reimagined through transformative inclusion, yeah, if it could be imagined through transformative inclusion. So it's something to think about, isn't it?
Yeah.
Not just in engagement in universities or with research, but what if we take that idea out to society as a whole? What does that look like? Yeah. Opening a big box of frogs can of worms there. And we've got a question from Sian as well. So we'll bring Lewis back onto Spotlight. And then Sian's just popped in the chat. I wonder if the fellows could mention how they roughly allocated their fellowship budget and how it might have levered support elsewhere. I mean, that's a big question, Sian. Do we really want to talk spreadsheets?
No, and I don't want you to go into it at all, but I want people to have an idea of what that 25,000 might buy. It can buy time out, it can buy some extra resource, it can buy your events. So just to give people an idea.
Yeah, so roughly what sorts of things have you decided to spend your money on? How did you get to that decision? And the other bit was, has it helped you get money from elsewhere or get resource from elsewhere? Do you want a minute to have a think about that? Or Lewis, have you been thinking and are you ready to go?
I can happy coming in. I guess, yeah, it's interesting looking at the budget, what was proposed at the application stage, and I think a lot of that has to change. But I think, yeah, in terms of general buckets, I think definitely having some time for your own time, as it were, buying out time has been really helpful and really important. I think that is immensely valuable. I think a lot of it is even using it to kind of travel and do conferences and be able to speak to people in person where that's possible. And then a large part of our budget is going to also be working with this kind of producer and collaborator and thinking about what other support and buying in a bit of that kind of, not just thinking about it in terms of editing, but a bit of a kind of a partner to help think some of this through, add a little bit of additional capacity in areas that I have a lot less expertise in terms of production of a very strong story. So, and I'll let that kind of flow because I've kind of got some interesting ideas about what the outputs might look like, and it might be partly a website or some of the kind of creative tools. And so I've saved a little bit of budget for some of that production element. But yeah, they're probably the main three buckets from my side. And then in terms of what it's leveraged, I think at the moment it's still quite open, but I think I did mention the word permission, and I think there is something about using, I've got a fellowship at the moment, which as someone not in an academic space has been really helpful sometimes to have a slightly different conversation with people. Because then it's all of a sudden it's like, I don't know why, but it just makes it feel like, oh great, like let's have a conversation. I'm like a learning conversation. I'm doing a fellowship, I'm exploring different ideas. And I think especially in fields that are not my own, I think it gives me a bit of permission to be like, hey, I'm curious, but there's also kind of not that it always has to be very serious, but there's kind of an interesting kind of, framing for playing. Let's have a conversation because I'm here to learn as much as anything else.
Thanks, Lewis. So we've got buying out your time, money for travel to conferences to meet people in person, your podcast, and then you've kept a little bit to the side to see what you want to do with next. I think it's really interesting, that permission piece. So it gives you permission or people to permission to engage with you. And that is a currency in itself, isn't it? Having that agency or permission to go out and speak to other people. Tanvir, would it be putting you on the spot to have a think about yours?
No, that's it's quite similar. I mean, it's been a day and a half of my time, which has been crucial, absolutely crucial. And obviously the symposium and the online events, but also what's been really amazing has been the mentorship. And I know Lewis mentioned his. I have had the most wonderful mentor. And it's the first time I've actually had the opportunity to work with a mentor in this way. And the mentoring and having days in the diary for, just spending time talking, dreaming, thinking with somebody who's, got all these networks and connections is very exciting. And thinking about, the what next, what does this mean? This is only for both Lewis and I, this is a kind of the year is a springboard. So, what next? And I think having a fellowship also, as Lewis says, but this permission to be really nosy and go and, sort of move in, I'm with Bath Spa University, and I can move into different spaces within Bath Spa University with this fellowship and say, I'm really interested in what you're doing through the lens of creative public engagement, and bringing inclusion again into that. What do you access inclusion? So it's this springboard. It's the safety of having your work time allocated, and then it's these additional projects that you can do, bring together. And bring more people.
Lovely. Thank you both.
Hello, I'm Sarah Rafferty, Community Engaged Learning Manager at the University of York and one of the Engaged Fellows for the NCCPE this year. And today I'm going to tell you a little bit more about my fellowship, what the project was, what we've gained from being involved. And apologies, I am part of a double act really for this fellowship with Kate Harper, but Kate Harper is currently on maternity leave, so you just got me today. So I'll tell you a little bit more about who we are. So Kate and I both work at the University of York and kind of worked around each other for the last 12 years or so, maybe a little bit longer than that even, and around community engaged learning, which is the idea of being the bridge between students and the communities. So students learning in partnership with communities as part of their studies in general, thinking about how they can kind of develop mutually beneficial activities, and that's generally assessed through reflection. But Kate and I have really been doing this work in a voluntary basis for at least 10 years or so before moving into the curriculum in 2022. So we've really built up over that time kind of how we do this, which is generally through team-based co-designed projects at York, working with partners in a wide range of sectors. So we have sustainability related projects. In York, we have a lot of history and heritage projects, as well as things that are more around sociology, health, psychology. The range of projects at the moment is really growing since we shifted into the curriculum. So we're based in central team, so we're part of professional services, and we lead still the volunteering team as well as community engaged learning. And since putting it into the curriculum, that kind of support has grown quite quickly. So we're now working across about 12 different departments so far. We had about 700 students involved in community engaged learning in the last academic year, so 24-25, and that's looking to grow a bit more as we look ahead to the next couple of years as well. But we are still a pretty small team, and it's been kind of growing from the bottom up, even though York has kind of got a strategy for public good. Those two things are sort of marrying up, which is helping us get into the curriculum, but we're still sort of building our reputation for this work and kind of the sustainability for it within the institution. So why did we apply for the fellowship? So really it was about kind of improving what we do. It was very much around how can we be better and make sure that we say that the work that we do is about mutual benefit for students and for communities. And a couple of years ago, as part of an OFS funded bid, we did some extra work looking at student impact. And we started looking at the communities work, but never quite got to kind of get into that. So that's what we really wanted to do with this fellowship, was to be able to build a evaluation tool that we could use as professional staff within this space without needing to be social science academics, that we can use on a regular basis to check actually that the work that we're doing is mutually beneficial. We know it anecdotally, but also we wanted something we might be able to report on to kind of help continue to build that case for why community engaged learning is so beneficial to universities. Also where there may be some challenges in how we work with communities and making sure that it is a reciprocal relationship. So that's what we wanted to do, and that's what we kind of focused our fellowship application around, was that piece of work in terms of building our skill set and building upon our leadership as well within the space of community engaged learning. And we thought that the fellowship would really help give us access to the support in that space, give us the ability to kind of engage with different academics, allow us to enhance our skills, and it would help us raise the profile of community engaged learning, both internally at the university. As I said, we're kind of growing it in some ways and trying to build our credibility and grow our reputation for it. So there was part of raising our profile internally, but also externally, kind of helping to build some of the momentum around this pedagogic practice in the UK. So that's why we applied. And then what have we been doing? So we have been working on that kind of piece of impact. We teamed up with Cynthia Mearshon-Schmidt, who's one of our sociology academics, who has a mixed experience in both qualitative and quantitative analysis and some experience of working in kind of communities. And she helped us kind of to marry up the idea of we felt like community engaged learning is helping to build capacity in communities, but teaming that up through the lens of kind of a community capitals model. So the idea of kind of social, political, human or cultural capital, how do we build that in communities through the work that we do? So are the partnerships and networks that we have with that enhancing communities through the social side, the political capital, are we enabling our organisations to actually impact change and meet their strategic aims? Cultural, so actually are we co-producing with communities? Are we listening? Does it feel respectful? How are we developing those processes within the work that we do? So it's about how we do it as much as what is happening. And then that what side, that human, what are those kind of skills and knowledge that are being exchanged, that are being left as a legacy for communities? What does that look like? So from a top point of view, we were thinking about what's that kind of transformational impact in terms of mass capacity building, but we've kind of built that out into a matrix of like actually from that reducing capacity, neutral, adding capacity, or transformational. And that's what we're now testing and exploring to work out, is that an effective way for us to evaluate these kind of activities? Focus groups with university partners, with some of our community organisations, and conducting surveys as well. So we're in the process now of kind of trying to gather that together, analyse it, and probably amend and iterate, and it's going to be something that we'll be doing for a while, because it is messy trying to work out how to do community impact effectively, and that's definitely something I've learned over the last year. It's not a quick, easy solution. But it's been really insightful to kind of have those conversations and to be able to have that opportunity through the fellowship to kind of explore this area of work, and hopefully something that we can continue to work on and develop as we go forward, and also then reflect that back on some of our student impact work as well. So from a project point of view, that's been very much what I've been doing with the fellowship, but actually the fellowship has been so much more than really I expected about what it was going to be. So there is this real driver from the NCCP that this is about your personal development, and I've really felt that, and it's given me a lot of the confidence and the permission, not least a bit of car space in the week that can be really busy, to think actually what do I want to do in terms of the fellowship, how can I support myself? And some of that's come through in taking a leadership role in relaunching the kind of and building up a network for community engaged learning in the UK. From the NCCP themselves, they really do embrace you as a fellow, and I've learned so much from working alongside the other fellows, as well as connecting with the wider NCCP team, seeing the different initiatives they're involved in, having that chance to be part of the Engaged Futures group, for example. But also having that little bit of kind of space for personal development and thinking about what you want to do has allowed me to take opportunities that sometimes maybe I couldn't. I've kind of got that little bit of funding or that bit of space to go and do things, such as attending a teaching institute around teaching social action. So it's been really enriching from that point of view to be able to stop and think about, what do I want and what do I need to kind of develop and enhance my skills and my knowledge for the role that I'm in. And for the future. And then that third piece, that's so much more bit around, we wanted to use the fellowship to help raise our profile, but it really has, it's kind of given me a platform in which I've been able to be part of a project team with senior leaders here at the university, some of our associate deans, and they've kind of picked up that student impact work that I mentioned before and think about, how can we take it to the next level? How can I get it published? What more can I do with it? So having that credibility and that kind of that badge of being an NCCP fellow has really opened all sorts of doors and experiences for me. So what's next? My little plug and opportunity is a couple of spaces left. So if you'd like to join us at the first UK Service Learning Community Engaged Learning Conference, that's happening on the 10th of July at the University of York. So it'll be a really nice day to kind of bring together lots of that learning and those colleagues and networks that I've built over the year to actually meet in person and help have these conversations about how do we build the case for community engaged learning. I'm also going to be presenting to the US network, which is called IOSLICE, around community engaged learning at their conference in August, and that's thanks to this fellowship as well. And really beyond the fellowship and this work is about trying to grow community engaged learning at York. Hopefully that tool will help give us the evidence that we need to kind of talk about not just this being a student activity, but also its value to the community and bringing those two things together. So fingers crossed it will continue to kind of help us grow the reputation, help build it to be a more sustainable programme as we navigate the quite challenging times that universities face. So that's all really from me. It's been brilliant to be an NCCPE fellow, and if you've got any questions, whether that's about fellowship or about community engaged learning and measuring impact, I'd love to have a chat, so feel free to get in touch. Thank you.